for AVL Podcast centres on the topic of network security. I sat down with Joshua Rush for Audinate's take on the topic.
An obvious question to begin with is, how's worship? Are they even an important enough niche to raise the topic of network security?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so what we've seen is that there's been this evolution. And so when everything was in the analog world, security wasn't that big of a concern. I think you had some natural security because things were physically protected, because you could take devices and they were physically protected by where those devices were. And then as everything moved to networking, at first it was great because everything was open. It's easy to use. You can just pop in, say, Dante controller. You can change routes. And that's a great evolution from analog. But then in certain situations, people started to realize that security still is very important in a networked world. And in particular, in the case of houses of worship, so you have different types of things you're trying to secure. Probably the biggest concern is more just around protecting network from accidental issues, right? So in houses of worship, you have a lot of volunteers that maybe aren't super familiar with the equipment. They're maybe don't have an extensive audio engineering background, and they're coming in and they're just managing a system on a volunteer basis on the weekend. And so you can have security that not just protects you from the really bad things that you see in the news, but also just protects you from inadvertent changes or people that maybe don't know what the ins and outs of a full system.
But of course, overnight, the implications have become big because, like you said, whereas they may have been less secure, the analog systems, the biggest barrier is gaining entry to that equipment, right, having to be close. And we've immediately connected ourselves with the world now. Everybody potentially can gain access to our system from wherever.
Right. Well, yeah. And again, that's where you have different levels. So there's access within just the that particular LAN or within that facility. And then, there's exposure from the outside as well, too. In the case of networked audio, the second part of that, exposure from the outside, is very, very limited. But it's more the first, just trying to protect the network within a facility or within a particular LAN.
So how do you do that? How do you build in the capability for a systems manager to effectively configure the system to what they want while limiting the kind of damage that an end user can do who's untrained in?
Yeah, it's a really good question because there's kind of this continuum between ease of use at one side and then really kind of locked down, secure, difficult access on the other. And in particular, in house of worship, you want to be able to strike a happy medium there. If you make the system too complex, really locked down, then it's going to be harder, again, for these volunteers to use. And so there's a couple things we recommend. The first is just from a network design perspective, just following network best practices in terms of how the network is built, who has access to the network itself. And there's all sorts of guides out there online you can find around network best practices. But more importantly, specifically for the networked audio component, we developed software called Dante Domain Manager. And what that does is allows you to first and foremost create domains or zones or groups of products around the particular house of worship and how it's built. So for example, one of the things we hear a lot about is having one zone be the main sanctuary and an overflow room, for example, being another one. And so you can create those different domains, but then also control who has access to those domains and what they can do. So if you have someone that's just working, say, in that main sanctuary and maybe not in the overflow room or a classroom, then you can actually lock that domain down and they don't have access to it.
And how about when I first talked to you about Dante Domain Manager, we were looking at it from an enterprise kind of perspective about really scaling up to very big things. But how does that scale back?
It's interesting because we have 3 different packages for Dante Domain Manager: Silver, Gold, and Platinum. And the Platinum is kind of what you described. It's really designed for a higher end enterprise, someone that has a full campus with multiple domains that they're using, hundreds of products. But the Silver package, the lowest level one, it was actually House of Worship was the design center for that. So we actually created that package specifically for the House of Worship. And again, there's houses of worship that would fit in each of those. Like if you take a big mega church, they might look more like that enterprise. But with the Silver package, it has 2 domains. And again, the idea was being able to isolate a couple different parts of the facility. So the main sanctuary from the rest of the facility or from an overflow room. But the most important part is it gives you access to that security component that I was talking about. So even though it doesn't have as many domains or products that you might have as the higher end packages, you still get the full security component in terms of being able to create all the different users, customize those users' roles and what they have access to, and be able to manage your network that way.
Do you think it's important that the systems integrator that's deploying these systems has a thorough understanding of the security and the implications around it? Or is that part of what you also try to provide with the software, a way of just taking care of this whole topic and removing it as an issue?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think the answer is probably all of the above. So as I mentioned before, step number one is just making sure you have good network security set up. So before you even get around to putting audio or video on the network, just making sure you've employed best practices. And that's where, again, having a certain level of knowledge within the IT department is important to be able to do that. But we've certainly designed Dante Domain Manager as an easy solution to get that next layer of security. So you don't have to know all the ins and outs. You're able to just get the software package and configure it and get a lot of that control.
So that's from more like an internal perspective of how do you stop people opening up the system to exploitation. But looking at it from the outside, the vast majority of houses of worship, they wouldn't warrant anybody wanting to intrude with their systems, but there are some very prominent, very big church campuses around the world that often draw a lot of attention, not always for favourable reasons. And there will be people looking to try and exploit their system from the outside. How does Dante look at that side of things, as in how do you help protect people from the outside? And presumably that's kind of a never-ending battle, chicken and egg type thing of one person catches the next, outdoes the next, and then you work on it.
Yeah, I would say that's pretty similar to what we were just talking about in terms of the IT department employing best practices for their network itself, because really that's step number one before you get around to putting Dante onto the network. So it's not necessarily a Dante specific thing when you're talking about protecting your network from the outside. I mean, frankly, that's what IT managers are living and breathing every day, is understanding their network, understanding where the vulnerabilities are, how to fill those holes, and it's the ongoing practice. So whether it's the network that's being used for computers, printers, servers, or it's being used for audio, those are the things that they should be putting in place to keep their network secure.
But it's, for right or wrong reasons, the person who deploys or manages the audio network might not always have much of a say in the overall network, the way it's been deployed, configured, or whatever. So let's say that a Dante system is going to be set up on a very poorly configured network that is open to intrusion from the beginning. Are there extra protections that stop them moving through from the basic network into your part of the system and messing with things?
Again, that's a role Dante Domain Manager can play in terms of who can access it. And so it puts that in place in terms of only letting users that are set up and have the right permissions in Dante Domain Manager even being able to see the devices on the network or be able to access those devices. So that's a layer of security, again, that Dante can provide on top of what's already on there for the network.
Do you see much evolution in this topic, this conversation really, or do you feel it's more like, this is fundamental learning that has to come in when you move towards security stuff, but once you know it and you continue to practice it, that's it, we're good? Or is it constantly going to be an evolving topic?
Yeah, so I think more and more, and this is very cliche, but AV has become IT. So I think you can just look at the IT world as a model of what we're going to see on the AV side, and it is an always evolving topic. If you look at you talk to IT managers and you look at what keeps them awake at night and what they're spending a lot of their time on, it is the sort of the constant evolution of security and making sure they're one step ahead of whatever that next threat is. So yeah, I think it's something that's going to be an ongoing topic.
Okay, and how do you persuade your customers that they need to keep their mindset on this topic and move along with it rather than consider that they've done their part and that's it? Or is that not something that concerns you?
Well, I think certainly making people aware, like I mentioned, I think was the first question, was this kind of evolution where people are moving from analog to IP, and then once they make the jump to IP, making them aware of what comes along with that, right? So a lot of benefits, a lot of reasons to do it, but then also making them aware that, okay, you do need to start thinking about security and helping to provide some of those best practices, and then also, again, software that can help them manage it. So yeah, we do feel like that's something that we want to help educate people on and raise awareness around.
Is this a big element of your, I mean, I know that you're very big on training. Well, all of the stuff that more recently has moved online that used to be only in-person training,
Right.
It must mean that there's hundreds more people now taking part in these things than maybe there was 5-6 years ago. Is security a big topic in this, or?
So yeah, our training, I would say, has gone through an evolution. So as you mentioned, we first started with our certification that was all the way back at level 1. Now we're up to 3 levels. And we've had over 60,000 people that have come through our training in some form or fashion. And so naturally that conversation gets into more complex topics. So the people that have come through and done the basics and they learn level 1, level 2, and how to operate a basic Dante network. Now we have more people where we're having that more advanced dialogue and talking about topics like security, talking about monitoring their network, managing their network. So things like Dante Domain Manager are more and more part of the conversation on the training side.
I guess one of the, I mean, we get this with so much technology. It's only an issue once you've suffered that problem. And once you've suffered that problem, it's too late by that point in time.
No, it's a great point. And that's one of the reasons we do try and go out and educate people about it, so they can be proactive and put the solutions in place and not be scrambling after the fact to try and fix something.
But everything is becoming more connected. It's not something that's going to go away anytime soon. And I presume that in a couple of years, I will sit down with you again and we'll find out how things have changed. And
Absolutely. Well, no, it's all like I said before, tons of benefits for moving to IP. I think everyone's realizing that, and we're helping to kind of educate them along the way and give them the tools they need.
And I think it certainly should never be something that dissuades you from doing these things. The benefits of moving far outweigh the risks of what you can do.
Absolutely.
But it's a consideration that you should be aware.
And yeah, making sure you're doing it the right way. Right.
All right. Thank you, Josh. Thanks for chatting to me.
Absolutely. Thank you.